From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazan, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. Is Andre Johnson
Jr.
Do not forget the Junior. It's very important to remember the Junior on the end of his name. But before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review if you are watching us on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And Andre, we're back. Been a long time. I know you haven't seen this in a minute, but we are back in business. I had my annual 2-week vacation that I take before the start of training camp because football season gets here. And it's 100 miles an hour from here on out. So technically this is my last day off, but some things have happened. I got to get back into the office, get my kind of bearing straight, if you will, because I've been out for so long. So wanted to jump in, get a pod, because there has been some significant developments here with the Saints over the last couple days as they gear up for training camp in Irvine, California in the next couple of days. But before we get into that, how are you, my friend? It's been a long time since I've seen you.
Man, I've been good. You know, I did a podcast with Juan Kincaid while you were gone.
I heard.
I've been on vacation the last week myself, playing a lot of that new NCAA football game that just dropped. So I've kept busy.
You've kept busy. I've kept busy. Last 2 weeks, man, I have packed in as much family time as I possibly could, knowing I was going to be away for about 25, 26 days when training camp starts. I fly out Tuesday morning, and our coverage starts Tuesday. So it's going to be a fun, interesting, and yet highly involved training camp. Very, very busy training camp for all of us here at Fox 8 as we get set for the Saints training camp 2024. So with that in mind, we're going to stay in that sort of lane when it comes to the big picture today, because there's been some not huge stories, but significant developments with certain players as they get ready for training camp, the Saints I'm talking about. One of the ones that happened yesterday on Saturday was Rashid Shaheed contract news, which was certainly interesting. Andre, you got details?
Oh, yeah. Rashid Shaheed signing a 1-year, $5.2 million extension. Now, what stands out when a lot of people hear that is the 1-year part. Mm-hmm. It typically, when you see young receivers get an extension, it's long-term, maybe 3, 4, 5 years. So, Sean, explain why the Rashid deal was only 1 year.
Well, there's a couple of things at play here. If you recall, Rashid Shaheed was an undrafted free agent. This past offseason, he was an exclusive rights free agent, meaning the only team he could sign with was the New Orleans Saints on a 1-year, $985,000 contract. That was an exclusive rights free agent deal. So this would have been technically going into his third season. He would have, he's going to do his third season now. After this season, he would have been a restricted free agent, which we know in restricted free agency, he has a little more freedom than an exclusive rights free agent, but he doesn't have as much freedom as an unrestricted free agent does in that situation. So what does this do? First off, it's a 1-year, $5 million extension for 2025. He's already on the books for 2024 for $985,000. So this gives Rashid Shaheed some guaranteed money and some protection. Remember, guys don't like playing on what technically is the final year of their contract because of injuries. It's risky. And even in Rashid's case, because he's going to be a restricted free agent, it is his final year of his contract. But, there's a little more, it's a little cloudier than a straight unrestricted free agency. But still, you want to have a little bit more protection. So he gets that with some guaranteed money in 2025, the $5 million. In the Saints case, which I think is a little interesting as well, they get out in front of restricted free agency. And you would say restricted free agency kind of favors the club. And that is true because they have the right of first refusal. They have the tenders. Another team could come in, make an offer. Obviously, they have the opportunity to match that offer. So if Shaheed were to blow up, have a big year, who knows what could happen with another team willing to come in and offer Shaheed a big contract. And this bypasses that uncertainty or that, I guess, quote-unquote risk for the Saints in that regard. So mitigated a little bit of Shaheed's playing risk, mitigated a little bit of the Saints' risk as well when it comes to restricted free agency. And there's also this. I mean, we talked about this a couple times because he was on our free agent list when we were talking about guys going into contract years, if you recall, a couple weeks ago when we did the pod. Shaheed has clearly outplayed his contract the first 2 years when he was in New Orleans. I mean, by far, he has given the organization easily the biggest bang for their buck. How much they've spent on him versus what he's given him on the field, given them on the field. 2022, his first year, last year, 47 receptions, 5 TDs, a punt return for a touchdown, like 16 yards per carry. So he has clearly outplayed that contract. There's a little bit of the organization saying, you know what? Let's reward this guy too. I mean, come on now. This guy's not even making $1 million this year, which I know to us that's a lot of money, but to a professional football player that's been productive in 2 seasons, that's really rose the ranks of undrafted free agent to where he's at now, to potentially the team's number 2 target, or even in some cases, the big play guy for the wide receiver corps. So I do think there's a little bit of let's reward this guy for the work that he's done. Shaheed gets that $5 million check. Now the question I have is simply this: if he has a big year, 80 catches, I mean, he's clearly flourishing in this system, will he get a long-term deal done next offseason, even with this new extension? Because by this time next year, he would be going into next offseason, 2025 will be the final year of his contract. If he's coming off an 80-catch season where he's got 10 touchdowns, returned a couple kickoffs with the new kickoff rule and punt return, does he still want, or does he still in line for a big money extension at that point? I guess that's a bridge you cross next offseason. But I think all in all, this was one of those things where, look, we'll make you happy by guaranteeing you some money next year. You make us happy by we'll avoid a little bit of that gray area with restricted free agency. And let's go have a good football season this year with Shaheed and this new offense. And let's get this out of the way. They did it. Seemed pretty clean. And they got the job done.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I mean, the league loves guys like Rashid Shaheed because you can teach route running. You can take, I don't want to say anybody, but a lot of NFL players, you can take them, you can teach them how to run routes, you can teach them IQ, you can teach them so many things, but the one thing you cannot teach is speed.
Yeah.
And Rashid Shaheed has that a lot more than most other players in the National Football League. You mentioned he came in as an unrestricted free agent. Most unrestricted free agents, the hope for them is just that they make the team and maybe can eventually develop into a player that can produce a little bit for you. But Rashid Shaheed's rookie year, he was making big plays for this team.
Yeah.
He is now pretty comfortably your wide receiver too, your second wide receiver on the team. So, yeah, I agree with you. He's definitely outplayed his previous contract, and he's outperformed whatever expectations the Saints had for him when he came into the building. I think he's earned his $5.2 million, and if he does have, say, an 80-catch season this year, if he does pop off and go crazy, you absolutely look to lock in Rashid Shaheed to a long-term deal, because if you don't, I can think of at least 20-something other teams who want that deep threat kind of guy, that burner, especially you mentioned this year in this offense. If he catches 80 passes, it's probably a lot of run after the catch stuff. That's
no
what
doubt.
we both
No doubt.
pinpointed that we want to see him really improve on and get into this year. So a guy who can make plays after the catch and be a deep threat, oh, yeah, the league's going to want him. So
I do think it's also a little bit of a sign of like this was kind of the Saints' discovery. He's their guy.
Yeah.
They targeted him. They developed him. He's become this guy. And, those types of stories, especially in undrafted ranks, especially with this organization, you don't want to see someone else enjoy the kind of the fruits of that,
labor,
And, there's the restricted free agent level, the tender levels where you can be a first-round level or a second-round level. If he signed somewhere else, they would get the compensation back, whatever it is. But still, even with that, I mean, I do think there's a legit, I'm going to call it fear, but concern or reality that if this guy does well and he's a restricted free agent next year, another team could view him as the number one, or whatever the case may be, the deep threat, and he could be enticed by that, and it could get too expensive for the Saints. And even with compensation, that could be something they don't want to do within the organization. And look, Shaheed didn't have to sign this, but I understand why he did, because it's never easy to play on a one-year deal, and he's terribly underpaid, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
But we could be looking back at this at the end of the season and say, you know what? The one-year extension for $5 million, he's still underpaid at that point. So, but I think this was probably meant for at some point next offseason to revisit it, and either you roll with what they got on the books, or perhaps you scratch it out and do a long-term deal next offseason with Rashid Shaheed, depending on how he does this year in the Clint Kubiak offense. So all in all, I got to call this a win-win. It's one less, I guess, I don't know if it was ever an issue, but one less one less item you got to worry about when you get into training camp. Another item
that you do
is
have to worry
something
about.
we do have to worry about. The Saints do have to worry about. Involves at one point, one of the best players in the history of the organization, or looked like it was going to go that way with his career, and that's Ryan Ramczyk.
Yep, Ryan Ramczyk officially ruled out for the season, and it's not a big surprise for most people who have really been locked into this situation. We knew that he'd be physically unable to perform this year, and the Saints seemingly have known that this route would wind up developing because they seem like they've been preparing for life without Ryan Ramczyk for a while, drafting Taliesin Fuaga, who was a right tackle coming out of college, even though he's been at left tackle, moving Trevor Penning over there, kind of trying to see what they have in these young guys to potentially replace a guy who, like you mentioned, is one of the best offensive linemen we've ever seen in New Orleans.
Yeah, and look, we weren't breaking any, we weren't like, didn't take brain surgery, put it that way, to see the writing on the wall when it came to Ryan Ramczyk. We've been saying it here, and it's not just us, it's been saying it. Any Saints pod you listen to, any Saints show you watch, any Saints article you read. The likelihood of Ryan Ramczyk being back in 2024 was always very, very, very slim, to the point where, I don't know about you, but I have gone on my Saints coverage with the assumption that he's out.
Yep.
Now we know for sure he's not going to be back in 2024, and let's get real. The likelihood of him coming back after 2024 is even slimmer. So I will continue to go with the idea that Ryan Ramczyk's career is likely done. And that's sad because at one point in his career, he was the model of durability. I remember his rookie year, he came in, started from day one at left tackle, then kicked over to right tackle, didn't miss a single snap his rookie year. He was incredibly durable the first 4 or 5 years of his career. In the last couple of years, the wrong injury caught him, and it's just been downhill from there. And that's sad because, honestly, he could have been, his first 5 years of his career kind of been stretched out to 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. You're talking about a potential Hall of Fame type career.
Yeah.
Now, he'll go down as one of the Saints' best at right tackle, but it's a short career, shorter than it had to be, shorter than it could have been, shorter than it should have been because of injuries. And look, he had injuries coming out of Wisconsin, but for the first few years of his career, like I said, he was able, to offset those injuries and stay healthy. And now the Saints move on. We know it's been Trevor Penning in the offseason. It's going to be something that we watch all offseason when it comes to the offensive line. All training camp when it comes to the offensive line and the right five and who ultimately becomes the right tackle. And I don't think that the Saints organization, I think they've all known that this is probably it for Ryan Ramczyk. So we know he's not going to be in 2024, and we'll see what happens to that. But like we said, his career is, at least in my opinion, likely over. And it's just that's the overall feeling that I have because I think all of us have kind of moved on from. We've all kind of known Ryan Ramczyk coming back was going to be very, very likely it wasn't going to happen. But now it's, I guess, official for 2024, and you just kind of left with that. Man, he's going to be one of the organization's best at the position, even with a short window of time playing career. But NFL, at one point in time, he was considered one of the best right tackles in football, maybe the best right tackle in football. And now that it appears that career is going to end a little prematurely. So not good. It's tough, but also not unexpected.
Yeah, I think for Saints fans, this will wind up being a pretty big what if when you look back at this team a few years from now. I mean, imagine if you have Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle, how differently we would be talking about this offensive line right now.
Oh, yeah.
How much more confidence we would have potentially, not just in the line, but the offense as a whole, knowing that you've got Ramczyk and you've got McCoy, you've got Ruiz on the right side, you've got Fuaga, who now you can plug into left tackle. Penning isn't necessarily thrust into the position to where he has to play and has to perform, and it seems like the Saints are now looking for their next Ryan Ramczyk. You mentioned how much success Ryan had early in his career. They've got 3 offensive linemen right now who could start day one who are very early in their career, with Fuaga being a rookie, Nick Saldiveri being a second-year player, and Trevor Penning going into, I believe, his 3rd season.
Yeah.
So first, second, and third-year players all could potentially start on the offensive line. You better hope you can find you another Ryan Ramczyk pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, I guess of those guys, the most likely candidate to fall into that category,
Fuaga?
Fuaga. I think that would be the obvious name there. But that's not a guarantee. And look, as you laid it out, and we've laid it out over the past weeks and months, that makes or breaks your season. If how they construct that offensive line and how quickly or slowly that line comes together will basically be, in my opinion, the biggest reason for wins and losses in 2024. So it's tough. And like you said, it would be very nice, especially with this new system, to have just an anchor on the right side with Ramczyk in his prime. He's only 29. Is he 30 yet? I'm not even sure he's 30 yet.
I don't think he's 30 yet.
And just, being the beast that he once was. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in 2024, and it's highly, highly unlikely that it ever happens again. Solid career, though, 7 years. I think he's a shoo-in for the Saints Hall of Fame. But, at one point, we were thinking best right tackle in football, and if that trajectory would have kept going up, we may be talking about an NFL Hall of Fame, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So it's tough, but Saints move on, thus we move on.
Right, and speaking of moving on, he was not the only player who was put on that physically unable to perform list. You've got Juwan Johnson also on that list, Chase Young on the list, Tano Passanio, and Nephi Sewell. Of those names, is there anyone that stands out to you?
Well, look, Juwan Johnson was something that popped up late in the offseason, so we were curious about it. I'm still curious about it because of the lack of bodies at the tight end position and how long is he going to go. And clearly he's not ready now, and we'll see how close he gets to the start of training camp. But to me, the one is Chase Young. Because no one truly knows where he's at on his timeline. But this is the clearest indication that he isn't ready to go as of this moment. Despite some vague optimism throughout different spurts when it came to the offseason camp and the offseason mini camp, talking to Dennis Allen, and that we had that very interesting back and forth with Chase, who was optimistic but then lacked detail in each one. So it was kind of this push-pull where you wanted to believe in his optimism, but you obviously there was some reasons to doubt whether or not he was going to be ready to go once training camp starts. So we'll see how long this lasts when it comes to PUP, when he gets activated off of PUP. And if he's still on PUP when the season starts, that would be a huge miss and a huge disappointment. Hopefully that is not the case. And it's fine to me if he's not ready to start practice 1 or even preseason game 1 or preseason game 2. You'd like to get him in training camp preseason at some point, but if you don't, just be ready when the games count. Just be ready when the games count, because you would hate to see this guy miss regular season games when he was the highest profile free agent addition. And we know, we've said this, they need someone to emerge as an edge pass rusher, a dominant edge pass rusher. That's why they brought him in. They felt like the risk was worth the reward, given the money that they paid to spend on this guy, what he's done throughout his career when healthy. So if this carries over into training camp and he starts the season on PUP and he's got to miss the first 6 games, man, that would be such a bummer. But right now, this was just there's no spinning it now. We know he's on PUP. How long he's on PUP remains to be seen. So that's the biggest name. But I am also monitoring the Juwan Johnson situation, just because if he's not ready to go, they may have to bring in a tight end at some point, just for the sake of practice reps during training camp, which there are plenty. So that would be the guy that stands out to me.
Definitely. And I mean, it wasn't a huge surprise, because I remember when he came in, the Saints essentially set his timetable, or the hope that he would return, being game 1 of the regular season. So you got the sense that training camp and maybe even the preseason, you probably wouldn't see him. But Chase Young, of the 4 guys that I named, he's the game changer, the potential game changer. Juwan Johnson, good player.
Yeah.
He has an impact at times, but Juwan Johnson probably wasn't going to catch for 1,300 yards this season. Nephi Sewell, good depth piece. Tano Passanio, versatile, great depth piece. But Chase Young, if you get the Chase Young the Saints were hoping they signed in the offseason, that's a guy who could get you 15 sacks. That's a guy who can change the way your defense is played.
Yes.
That's a guy who can step in. Like I said a few podcasts ago, the Saints are preparing for life after Cameron Jordan.
Yeah.
If you can get a Chase Young in New Orleans long term, that could be your life after Cameron Jordan. Chase Young is a guy who can change not to be dramatic, he can change the face of defense in the city of New Orleans for this franchise if he winds up being everything you hope that he's being. So, yeah, him being on the physically unable to perform list, it's not surprising, but you hope that he can get here in week 1 and have that kind of impact, because all of the other guys on the list, you need them to perform, especially Jawan Johnson, because you mentioned that tight end group is not deep at all. They've got Foster Moreau and Dallin Holker in there right now.
Yeah, and Taysom, whatever you want to call his role, right?
Yeah, exactly. But Chase Young, that's your game changer. That's the one who you want to see game 1 of the regular season.
And here's the deal as well, because there's going to be periodic questions about Chase Young, probably starting Tuesday.
Yep.
Okay? And there's going to be words said. The most important thing to remember when it comes to Chase Young is not what anybody's going to say. The most important thing is when we tweet, we get the update that Chase Young has been activated off of PUP. Anything else is just useless information, because you got to sort through all the positive spin unless there is a clear downward turn in the rhetoric surrounding Chase Young, where kind of like what happened with Ryan Ramczyk, when it wasn't the vague general positivity all of a sudden was, we haven't progressed the way we thought. Then everything changes. But when Chase Young's case, if you keep getting the vague general positive news, ignore it all. The most important thing is when you get the alert that says Chase Young has been activated off of PUP. That is when it gets real, because anything else before that is just conjecture and it's just talk, and it has no significance. When he's on the field, that is the most important thing. When he's not on the field, obviously you wait for this guy who could potentially be a game wrecker, but he's been that potential production type guy because it's always been such a hard swing of so great when he's healthy, but hardly ever healthy. And here he sits right now, not fully ready to go for training camp 2024.
Yeah, and keep in mind, even when he does come back, even when he gets to 100% or whatever percent he needs to be to step on the football field, that job isn't necessarily his day one. He still has to win that job.
Exactly.
Carl Granderson was one of the best defensive players you had last year. He's not just going to give up his spot. Cam Jordan is one of the best players in the history of this franchise. He's been the face of the defensive line for over a decade. And while Chase Young is out, while Tano Passignon is out, you've got the Peyton Turners and Isaiah Foskey's who are going to get a lot of reps in training camp and are going to have a chance to try to climb up that depth chart. So even once Chase comes back, he still has to battle those guys and earn a consistent spot on that D-line when the games get going.
Yeah, nothing's handed to you. And there's a lot of guys at defensive end. A lot of guys kind of fighting for their football lives on the defensive end position for the Saints as well. You got one guy at the end of his career, a couple young guys that need to kind of show that they can, be the guy. And you got a guy like Chase Young, who is a little bit of a wild card here. And you have the undrafted guy that's kind of emerged, and Carl Granderson. So that's going to be interesting to see how that sort of sorts itself out. Okay, so that's today, Sunday. Next week or Monday, we start. We'll have one more podcast here. Then I head to California on Tuesday. DA talks, Mickey Loomis talks, and then Wednesday, the Saints will have their first practice, and that's when things obviously get really real when it comes to the 2024 football season. So stick with us. It's about to get fun. It's about to be very, very, very active. And at some point, we're going to have Andre and I are going to have the split screen.
Yeah.
Me in California, him downstairs in our studio podcast. So be sure to look for that whenever practices start. So we'll try to keep the same schedule going whenever it is necessary, or once training camp starts, just to keep everyone going. Because honestly, as far as I know, we'll be the ones, myself and obviously the media there, will be the ones that will be able to obviously watch the entire practice. And I'm not sure how it's going to work in terms of who can actually see it and what we're going to be able to shoot and show. So a lot of our eyes will be counted on just to kind of relay what we see from Saints training camp. So should be fun. Full speed ahead coming in just a couple of days. You got anything else for us?
No, I'm just excited. It's Sunday. It's NOLA Gold Day.
Oh,
we're
go
recording
Gold,
this
baby.
on Sunday afternoon. The NOLA Gold play their first playoff game in franchise history in about 2.5 hours, and I will be there. So that's what the rest of the day is going to be.
All right, shout out to Fitz, the GM, NOLA Gold. Y'all doing big things, so congratulations, and bring home that playoff victory. Don't stop now. Keep it going. So anyway, that'll do it for us. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazan. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.